down tonight. It didn't make any difference. It makes it look like we're filled up now. So we're going to begin with, we'll tell you what, we'll go ahead and do, Jan, you got Jan's minutes?
Yes, I do.
Okay, let's do
Well,
that.
no, I don't have her minutes from last month. No.
Okay.
I'm taking them tonight and I have the board minutes.
Okay. One in there, everybody.
I thought they were an email, yeah. But she sent out an email.
Did she? I didn't get it.
Oh,
I mean, I haven't been home most of the day. Was it today?
no, it was,
Oh. You mean Pam?
Jan said her email.
She did?
Jan said I didn't even know
See
that she was going to have one.
and it was the minutes, I thought, from the December meeting.
I don't have it with me.
Okay,
I
that's
got
fine.
it, it's in
All
her.
right, let's go ahead and do the business, the treasurer's report, then we're going to, then Richard will turn it over to you, we'll do the business meeting afterwards.
Okay, for December, beginning balance was $10,211.23. We had income of $333.47, expenses of $470.42, which gave us an ending balance of $10,074.28.
Okay, membership?
Membership, we have 0 business, this is as the end of December, 27 life, and 31 members for a total of 58 as of the end of December. And right now, the memberships are just now starting to come in.
I got a whole bunch of them now in the mailbox today. Okay, Richard, you want to go ahead and take over right now? This is Richard McCormick, one of our board members. He's going to talk tonight for us.
When I originally put this together, we thought maybe do something on the 1864 election because it would have been for a November meeting, 150th anniversary, and then we got Mr. Bernstein committed to speak. So I figured I'd still focus on about 150 years ago, but instead of just the one event, actually there's 3 main events I'm going to focus on: the 1864 election, the 13th Amendment, and Lincoln's second inaugural. But before I get to those, I'm going to go through a few things during the war that I call them struggles or problems that Lincoln had to face with. But one of the reasons I'm doing that way is last year I read a book, Lincoln's Melancholy, by Joshua Sheep Wolf. It's a really good book about his natural moodiness, and there's just a few quotes during the war years that I don't know if people heard that I found interesting and I thought would, make a nice forward to the 1864 election. Just, it wasn't a case of him being elected, saying slavery's ended, war over, and everything moved on. It was a lot of work, a lot of stress. His melancholy is actually a natural, occurrence of his personality. There were members of his family that had been committed and that had various issues, and he had a couple of specific breakdowns around 1835 and 1840. There were issues with when his relationship with Anne Rutledge failed, and there were also political issues. Economy in Illinois went to the tank around 1840, and he had imposed his American system, the Henry Clay system of economics, and that busted basically, and Illinois had a lot of financial trouble, so it kind of left him depressed and, it was even suicidal. There's quotes from friends that were concerned about his life. So everybody thinks of him as a jokester, but he had a lot to overcome, just natural moodiness and melancholy. And, jokes were one way he dealt with it, and he did believe that people could, improve themselves by working, but he also had there was a certain limit. He wasn't quite Calvinistic, which you're either going to hell or you're going to heaven, you have no choice. He wasn't quite that strict. There was some room for personal growth, but he was pretty fatalistic. Fatalism is the word I've been looking for, and that was just part of his melancholy, as the book called it. Well, when he elected as president, that's a great accomplishment, but the problem started early and often. When he took office in April 1861, he thought he had a few weeks before anything would come to a head, but then he got a note that Fort Sumter only had about 6 weeks of supplies. The army, the men were going to starve to death, and so you can't stall or delay too much. So he, his Secretary of State was William Henry Seward, who thought he was the premier of the administration. Seward was the big time guy who lost out to Lincoln for a Republican nomination. Seward tried to take charge unofficially, try to shift the focus to Fort Pickens, or maybe try to create a different focus instead of Fort Sumter. But Lincoln maintained control, took charge, showed who was the boss, and he did agree to fortify Fort Sumter, but only with food and supplies, not with ammunition. And he did inform the Confederate government that's what he was going to do. But before the ships got down there with the food, the Confederates fired on Sumter and the war began. Lincoln responded by calling for 75,000 troops for 3 months. Several Confederate states then seceded. Some of them had seceded with South Carolina in late 1860, but now this led to several more, and of course that's just more trouble, more frustration, and here comes the fun. So the war had started, troops were being called up and trained, and this country only had 16,000 soldiers as a professional army before the Civil War, so now all of a sudden he's calling up 75,000, and the infrastructure is just a lot of work, a lot of time. On May 24th, one of the things that bothered him was there was a guy named Elmo Ellsworth of the New York Fires-Roth Regiment they wore fancy clothes and they paraded and drilled, but Elmo Ellsworth went into Alexandria, Virginia, took down a Confederate flag from a hotel, and when he was coming down the steps, the hotel owner shot him. This was kind of the first celebrity death, if you want to say, of the Civil War, but Ellsworth had been friends with Lincoln, so this was kind of a personal issue hurt him. It was, he became a martyr for the North, but it was a real personal loss for Lincoln as well. 2 months later, in July, was the Battle of Bull Run, or First Manassas. It started out well for the Union, but ended up with Confederates chasing Union troops, and even senators and everybody running back in Washington, D.C. A lot of people had gone out almost like a picnic, taking picnic baskets and carriage wagons, and so there was a stampede back into Washington, D.C. So, Lincoln had called out his men for 90 days, but this was the first sign that this was not going to be a short or easy war. And so that was, the first major battle of the war, and it was not good for the Union. They knew they were bigger, they had more men, more supplies, and yet they got their butts kicked. So it's not a good start. And then October of the same year, the Battle of Ball's Bluff, Edward Baker, a United States Senator, was one of the leaders of the Union troops, and he was killed at this battle. The reason I bring this up is Lincoln, Mary and Abraham Lincoln's second son, had been named Edward after the senator. So this was another real close friend that had been killed, and imagine the stress on a family, on a friend like that. Later in the year, from November 1861 to early 1862, there's what's called the Trent Affair. A Union captain took 2 Confederate agents off a British ship, Charles Mason and John Slidell, I think the 2 were, because they were going over to England and France as ambassadors, and the Union captured them and brought them back to the United States to be imprisoned, and he was a major hero, but England was pissed off pretty much, and so it took a few months of negotiating, because if you remember the War of 1812, one of the issues was British impressing U.S. sailors, capturing U.S. ships and taking them off there, and here's the United States doing the same thing, just this was a neutral ship. The captain thought he was being patriotic, and a lot of the American citizens treated him as a hero, but it was almost ended up with a war with England, so you're in a civil war and almost in a war with a third country. William Seward did a lot of negotiating, and they released the 2 men and able to avoid war, but that's 2 or 3 months of more stress and just a lot of effort and trouble that they didn't really need. In early 1862, one of the quotes that I found I wanted to mention, General McClellan was sick. Lincoln was having trouble with him as the head of the army, but his quote to Montgomery Means was, "The people are impatient. Chase has no money," and that's Secretary of Treasury Selman Chase. "The general of the army has typhoid fever. The bottom is out of the tub. What shall I do?" So when you're talking bottom is out of the tub, that's pretty depressing. The bad news is just a few weeks later, it got worse. His oldest living son Robert was at Harvard, but in the White House they had Willie Lincoln and Tad Lincoln still living with the family. Willie was 12 years old, and in February of 1862 got typhoid fever, probably from dirty water in Washington, and he was sick for several weeks and passed away. And this devastated both Lincoln, especially Mary for several weeks. But a couple quotes from Abraham to his secretary. Well, John Hay described Lincoln as profoundly moved by his death. His bereaved heart seemed afterwards to pour out its fullness on his youngest child. And then what Lincoln said to John Nicolay was, "My poor boy, he was too good for this earth. God has called him home. I know that he is much better off in heaven, but then we loved him so. It is hard to have him die." He walked down the hallway. "Well, Nicolay, my boy is gone. He is actually gone." And just the words are painful. But one thing I learned by researching this, 3 years later, on the day of the assassination, Lincoln and Mary had gone out for a cab ride, and Lincoln told Mary, we must both be more cheerful in the future. Between the war and the loss of our darling Willie, we have been very miserable." And I knew that Mary had carried on Willie's loss for years, but the first time I'd seen that quote from Abraham, and this was 3 years after he had died, he obviously was still feeling it. And this was 3 years of war. Hundreds of thousands of people died and wounded, and he still had his little son on his mind. So that's pretty powerful personal loss. As 1862 continued, there was a lot more struggles just as the war continued, especially with George McClellan. One quote is, Lincoln said, "If McClellan is not using the army, I would like to borrow it for a minute." Needless to say, him and McClellan did not get along. McClellan very passive, not as aggressive, using his force. There were Union losses at the 7-day battles in Virginia, and then Second World War, and then what is referred to as a missed opportunity at Antietam in the fall. Throughout the year, McClellan exaggerated the Confederacy, how many troops they had, and just always found excuses for not taking more aggressive action. After Antietam, McClellan had written a note to Lincoln that he did not follow up on Lee's army because his horses were too tired. Lincoln's response, "I have just read your dispatch about sore-tongued and fatigued horses. Will you pardon me for asking what the horses of your army have done since the Battle of Antietam that fatigues anything?" Probably not the best from a boss relationship, but that's certainly the perspective people had of McClellan and Lincoln had, is, why are you tired? What do? You let him run away, even though he had more men. 1862 continued to struggle, continued to create headaches. The various senators wanted McClellan replaced, and including Benjamin Wade from Ohio. And one of Lincoln's responses there was, "Wade, anybody will do for you, but I must have somebody." And even today, you think, like sports, you say, "Oh, they got to fire their coach," but who are you going to hire as a new coach? You can't just say anybody. You got to have a person. So, and then of course, the end of 1862, he did declare the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, but that was not exactly very popular, and the Republicans suffered a lot of losses at the fall elections, which of course, when you're the head of a party, that falls on you, and just more and more stress, more headaches. One thing he wrote at this time is his secretaries found a scrap of paper in his file, undated. They called it the Meditation on the Divine Will. I'm going to read just a couple lines from it. They thought he wrote it around September or October 1862, so that's why I've inserted it here. It actually sounds very familiar, very similar to the Second Amendment that I'll read parts of later, but I recommend you look it up online, or you can afterwards come and see it here. But a couple of the most meaningful lines from it. "Well, the will of God prevails. In great contest, each party claims to act in accordance with the will of God. Both may be, and one must be, wrong. God cannot be for and against the same thing at the same time. And he also suggested that I'm almost ready to say that this is probably true, that God wills this great contest and wills that it shall not end yet. It mentions that God could end it at any time, and each side has different goals, but some real deep philosophical thinking. And again, the Second Amendment or the Second Inaugural in 1864 will see similar language. So even with all this trouble going on, he's still, he's got all these individuals he's responsible for all the deaths. He's still thinking about what and why, the bigger picture. At the end of 1862, the Union had a humiliating loss at the Battle of Fredericksburg. They just sent men out after a hill and just got torn down and slaughtered and just really awfully conducted battle. And his quote after that was, "If there is a worse place than hell, I am in it." That kind of, what can you say about that? Early 1863, the same group went through a mud march where they tried to advance, but it rained and they just couldn't go anywhere and had to turn around because of the weather and the dirt roads. And then as 1863 came on, he had fired at Ambrose Burnside, who led at Fredericksburg, and replaced him with Joseph Hooker. But at Chancellorsville, there was another, what could have been a missed opportunity, where the Union had a pretty aggressive start to the battle, but Hooker turned passive and ended up being what a lot of people now call Lee's greatest victory. Certainly one of Lee's most aggressive, most audacious victories. But Lincoln's reaction after this was, my God, what will the country say?" It was you could argue maybe it's not, the Confederacy didn't gain a whole lot from that battle. They lost Stonewall Jackson, but the perception was it was a great victory for the Confederates. And as we all know, sometimes perception at the moment is a lot more important than what you might see 100 years later. Summer 1863 brought what seemed to be much better news, much happier news. The Union got great victories at Gettysburg and Vicksburg in July. Lee tried to invade the North and was turned back at Gettysburg, and then the Union finally broke down the stronghold at Vicksburg on the Mississippi River. Of course, this was good news, and Lincoln was happy about it, but he wasn't satisfied. He actually wrote a letter to George Meade, the commander of the Army of the Potomac. He ended up not sending it because he considered it too harsh. I'm going to just read a couple lines from this, and this is to the winning general. "Again, my dear General, I do not believe you appreciate the magnitude of the misfortune involved in Lee's escape. He was within your easy grasp, and to have closed upon him would, in connection with our other late successes, have ended the war. As it is, the war will be prolonged indefinitely. Your golden opportunity is gone, and I am distressed immeasurably because of it." So yeah, that's what he said to the winning general. But to his credit, he didn't send it and he kept it in his file. So years after the war, he heard of the letter, obviously wasn't happy, but you can see even such a great victory, it's missed opportunities, and so even the happiness is not all consuming. There was a little bit of good mood in July. In August of 1863, there was just an interesting quote that I wanted to add. John Hay was one of his private secretaries, wrote to his other secretary who was out of town, and he said, "The tycoon is in fine whack. I have rarely seen him more serene and busy. He is managing this war, the draft, foreign relations, and planning a reconstruction of the Union all at once." So the tycoon was the nickname Hay and Nicolay had for Lincoln. And just the phrase "in fine whack," you've always heard of things being out of whack, so now you finally hear something in whack. And just an FYI, why they called Abraham the tycoon, their nickname for Mary Lincoln was the old Hellcat. My understanding is her opinion of them was pretty much the same. And then that's a whole other subject, and I didn't really mention on here the issue. Mary Lincoln, here's a fascinating life. If you want to see a lot of ups and downs and mood swings. But a couple of things I put here in the middle of the presentation. There's a committee called the Joint Committee on the Conduct of the War, 3 senators and 4 representatives that kind of overlooked the war. Mostly they didn't aggravate Lincoln too much, but the main thing was they didn't like Democratic generals, they didn't like McClellan, but they were still over his shoulder, pestering him a little bit. Not a huge deal, but one worth mentioning. Another one that I'll mention here, but took place throughout the war, was cabinet issues. Of course, the president names their cabinet to help them out. And when Lincoln was elected, he chose several of his rivals for the presidential nomination as his cabinet members. And if you want to read Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin, it's a really good book discussing that. One of them, Simon Cameron, had been removed in early 1862, rumors of corruption in the War Department. Radical senators and politicians wanted William Seward removed, thought he was too conservative. Moderates wanted Salmon Chase out, thought he was too radical. So he had both sides going after him. Chase actually wanted to be president in 1864, didn't make a secret of it. So here's you're in a meeting and you want your boss's job and you're pretty much all open about it and everybody knew it. But actually both Chase and Seward did their jobs very well, and so Lincoln kept them on until 1864. Chase offered up his resignation for the 4th time, and 4th time was the charm. Lincoln accepted it. Chase actually ended up being Chief Justice of the Supreme Court later that year. But the infighting with the cabinet over several years was another problem. One thing a lot of people don't know about is at the time of the Gettysburg Address, as he rode back to Washington, Lincoln became very ill, very weak, had headaches and back pain, had a rash. He was diagnosed with malaria and scarlet fever. It took him almost 3 or 4 weeks to get back on full strength and do his work again. But he kept his sense of humor. As when he got back to Washington, he looked at one of his secretaries and said, "At least now I have something I can give to everybody." Of course, the one thing I didn't know, all the office seekers and looking for handouts. But that's through 1864, 1863. 1864 has been called Year of Decision or Year of Bloodshed, and this is getting to where I wanted to focus because everybody knew the re-election was coming up, and this would be the 3rd full year of the war. Grant came east as Lieutenant General, U.S. Grant. This was a big move, the first Lieutenant General in the U.S. Army since Washington. The Overland Campaign, and then there were just tens of thousands killed, wounded during this year. I'll discuss a few more specifics as we go on. The Overland Campaign, which was the main campaign in Virginia where Grant faced Lee, lasted from May 5th to June 24th. There were several battles. One of them I wanted to mention was Totopotomoy Creek, just to prove I could say Totopotomoy. But Wilderness, a bunch of... During this campaign, the Union lost 55 to 60,000 men during these weeks. The Confederates lost 33,000. But percentage-wise, Grant lost about 45% and Lee lost about 50%. So the Grant and Lincoln kind of understood the grim math that, yeah, they're losing more men, but they can afford to lose men. But if you're at home and you're reading the newspaper, you've seen the list of names coming back, it gets pretty depressing. It's hard for the non-military people to understand. It's probably hard for a lot of the, you have to be pretty cut off your emotions just to say, oh, let's lose this many men. So, but that was certainly the people who were getting war weary, and that's one of the goals of the South. And when you have lists of dead men in the middle of the war, that's the way to do it. A couple of specifics I wanted to mention about this campaign. At the Battle of Spotsylvania, the U.S. lost about 18,000 casualties and Confederates about 12,000. You'll hear about the Bloody Angle, just real nasty days. Cold Harbor was the one that's probably maybe Grant's low point. The U.S. lost about 13,000 casualties and the Confederates only about 2,500. It was just, Grant's always famous quote is, he's always regretted that second attack at Cold Harbor was made. The Battle of the Crater was a disaster for the Union. They came up with a good idea to dig a trench underneath the Confederate lines, fill it with gunpowder, and then blow it up. But then the follow-up, the guy in charge of the follow-up was drunk, basically, and a coward. And instead of chasing his men in, he stayed back. And they had trained some African-American troops to go in and go around the crater and attack the Confederates. But they sent in untrained troops. They were afraid of what the perception might be of using African Americans. The untrained troops just went straight into the hall, and so all the Confederates were looking down on them, and it was a disaster at the end of July, just a pretty humiliating defeat. And at this time, the weariness was starting to set in as such reports came through. Grant seemed to be going nowhere. He'd been in Virginia for weeks, had been fighting battles, and was just stymied. And then Sherman was down in Atlanta, Chattanooga, Atlanta, and he was going nowhere too. So it was very, very tough time. Nothing positive happening. One thing that did happen in this time was the Confederates did threaten Washington, D.C. They sent a General Juba Early through the Shenandoah Valley, and he chased towards Washington, D.C., which was lightly defended. Grant had stripped the capital of a lot of the best men, left some reserves, some of the older soldiers, some of the wounded soldiers, to cut some trenches. As Early approached it, he fought a battle up in Monocacy in Maryland, which hit 14,000 men routed the Confederate troops, or the Union troops. The Union troops were led by Lew Wallace. I mention that because if anybody's familiar with the Siege of Cincinnati, Lew Wallace was in charge over in Covington. He was, and he's also a guy known for riding Ben-Hur. The other guy that came to the aid of Washington, D.C. was Horatio Wright, who had been actually charged with the Department of Ohio. So Wright and Wallace had kind of helped Cincinnati out in 1862 and early war in Washington, D.C. And so Wright's troops actually arrived at Washington one day before the Confederates under Juba Early, and one of the Union soldiers made the obvious line is that Confederate General Early ended up being late. So, but that was at the end of July, and the pessimism, it was almost a low point for Lincoln here. August, from what I can see, August of 1864 was kind of the low point of Union morale, Lincoln morale. A couple quotes I wanted to mention, because again, the re-election is coming up in November, so a new administration or the future of the administration's at risk here. The Republican Party chairman, Henry Lehman, said the tide is setting strongly against us, while another powerful Republican, Thurlow Reed, I told Mr. Lincoln that his re-election is an impossibility. One of Lincoln's friends from Illinois was Leonard Swett, and he thought, unless material changes can be made, Lincoln's election is beyond any possible hope. It is probably clean gone now. And even Lincoln said to one of his friends, "You think I don't know I'm going to be beaten? But I do." So that's pretty gloomy, pretty low morale. And at this point, he gave an envelope to the cabinet members and asked them to sign it without reading it. This is what become known as the blind memo. If you've ever studied this, I'll go ahead and read what it said. It was August 23rd, 1864. This morning, as for some days past, it seems exceedingly probable that this administration will not be re-elected. Then it will be my duty to so cooperate with the President-elect as to save the Union between the election and the inauguration, as he will have secured his election on such grounds that he cannot possibly save it afterward. So here we go, 2 months before the election, and the candidate is pretty unconfident, I guess is a nice way to say it. As the election approaches, of course, both parties came out with their platforms. And the Republicans actually changed their name to National Union Party just for image issues, and nominated Lincoln and then Democrat Andrew Johnson. The Democrats nominated George McClellan, of course, and then there was a radical democracy of radical Republicans who nominated John C. Fremont. Basically didn't want Lincoln as a Republican. The Republican platform, a couple of their highlights was they wanted to maintain against their enemies the integrity of the Union and the paramount authority of the Constitution. I'll just read a few of these, not the whole thing. They approved the government not to compromise with the rebels. The platform claimed slavery was the cause and now constitutes the strength of the rebellion. And that's, people argue that's still what the cause was, but Republicans made their opinion known. We are in favor of such an amendment to the Constitution as shall terminate and prohibit the existence of slavery forever. We approve and applaud the wisdom, patriotism, and fidelity of Abraham Lincoln. Thanks to the American people are due to the soldiers and sailors of the Army and Navy, and more importantly, the government owes to all men employed in its armies, without regard to distinction of color, the full protection of the laws of war. There have been a lot of controversy over how Confederates treated black prisoners. They were basically taking them back into slavery, and here the Republican Party is saying no, they must be treated as other soldiers, which, not the exactly ending slavery, but that's still, in race relations, an important step. The Democrats, on the other hand, called the war, after 4 years of failure to restore the Union, the Constitution has been disregarded in every part. The object of the Democratic Party to preserve the federal union and the rights of the states unimpaired, so there's your states' rights platform. They mention a shameful disregard of the administration to its duties in respect to our fellow citizens who now are and have long been prisoners. And because of the controversy over African Americans, the Union had stopped prisoner exchanges. So there were a lot of white Union soldiers that were prisoners of the Confederacy that weren't being released. The Democrats were saying they should be released, and saying it was a shame that allowed African Americans to, the white men were suffering because of African Americans. The Democrat Party, though, one of the things was they kind of had their own split. And they nominated George McClellan as their president, but he was a war Democrat who favored prosecuting the war. Yet their vice president was George Pendleton of Cincinnati, who was a peace Democrat. And the peace Democrats wanted reunion immediately. Let's don't fight the war, let's let the Confederates go and create their own nation. So your two main nominations, opposite forces. The convention leader was August Belmont, who was a war Democrat. That the most famous Democrat of all was Clement Vallandigham, who was famous for his peace, for favoring peace. And he was a governor, or ran for governor of Ohio. He'd been arrested for speeches made, I think, in Dayton, and a real famous anti-war. But here's the Democrat Party, kind of a mixture of leadership. Do they favor the war? Do they favor peace? One thing I did want to mention was August Belmont. I didn't realize was if anybody in here is a horse racing fan, the third part of the Triple Crown is the Belmont Stakes. And August Belmont was who that was named for. That he was also the part of his career as a Democratic politician. So just, little tidbit I thought. The other thing, his son August Belmont II was a president of the Louisville and Nashville Railroad. One of the issues supposedly involved in Governor Gable's assassination was some dissension with the Louisville and Nashville Railroad over price fixing. So, they, not just in the Civil War, but they got involved in a lot of different things locally. McClellan did accept the Democratic platform, even though he was a war Democrat and it was kind of a peace platform. But his letter insisted that the Union must be preserved at all hazards. One thing is it took him like 7 or 8 days to send his acceptance letter. One of Lincoln's friends pointed that out to Abraham, and he said, "Oh, that's all right. McClellan's just entrenching, just making fun of how slow he was as a general. He was doing the same as a politician." There were some good things happening in late summer and fall. August 5th, the Union had success at the Battle of Mobile Bay. If anybody's ever heard the phrase "damn their torpedoes full speed ahead. It came from that battle, not exact wordings, but you know how phrases come together. In the Shenandoah Valley, General Phil Sheridan had great success wiping out Confederates, and it ended the Battle of Cedar Creek on October 21st. One interesting thing was that battle, Sheridan had gone to Washington and coming back, he had to come back and rally his troops that he'd been attacked while gone. There was a famous poem, Sheridan's Ride. It was written by T. Buchanan Reed to honor this battle. He was over in Cincinnati and wrote it, I think, on 8th Street in Cincinnati. So a little bit of a local connection as it became a famous poem that a lot of people repeated in school. And then on September 1st, the tide kind of turned. William Sherman captured Atlanta. The Confederates surrendered this key city. It was a lot of railroads, a lot of industry, and after several months of maneuvering, Sherman finally captured it. He wired to Lincoln, Atlanta, as Oregon fairly won. The U.S. suffered in the campaign about 31,000 casualties, and the Confederates about 34,000. The effects of this campaign, from one source I found, they listed it boosted Northern war morale, it weakened the peace platform of the Democratic candidate, contributed to Abraham Lincoln's re-election, weakened Confederate morale, and then it claimed that the city's importance to the Confederate military effort made it second only to Richmond. So this was a huge accomplishment, and a few weeks later, Lincoln ended up winning the election, and you'll see a lot of people will claim Sherman's victory at Atlanta as a key step to that. In the election, Lincoln got about 2.2 million votes, McClellan about 1.8 million, but that gave Lincoln a 55% to 44% majority, which I found a list that said that was the highest, like the third highest of the 19th century. So it sounds kind of close, but it was a pretty good margin. Electoral votes ended up being 212 to 21 in the Electoral College, so it wasn't really close there. The states McClellan won were New Jersey, Delaware, and Kentucky. So Lincoln's own state, 0 for 2. And one key thing that happened during the election was allowing soldiers to vote, and about 78% of the soldier vote went for Lincoln, not instead of for the former general. So the soldiers approved of the prosecution of the war. This brings me to the three main things I wanted to focus on. Time-wise, I'll try to speed it up a little bit here, but and it's actually I'm going to refer to the Gettysburg Address. There were 3 points in the Gettysburg Address. One I mentioned, conceived in liberty, the new birth of freedom, and then government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish. 3 famous phrases. The third one, about of the people, where I think I'll claim that the 1864 election showed that government of the people was not going to perish, because even in the middle of a civil war, they maintained legal elections. But in terms of a new birth of freedom, the 13th Amendment ended slavery, and I say that serves as the concrete new birth of freedom, the new birth. You can think of a newborn calf or a newborn giraffe at the zoo. You'll see it lying down. It'll stand up on its feet, it'll wobble and fall down, and that's kind of like the country did. But it's still, this was a new day for the country. The 13th Amendment was the first amendment to the Constitution since 1804, and it passed the House of Representatives January 31st, 1865. I will recommend people see the movie Lincoln if you haven't, because it has a lot to do with the passage of this amendment, and I think it does a good job of showing the politics behind it. It wasn't just, hey, let's end slavery, everybody agreed to it, and move on. There was a lot of work, and I like how that movie represented it. It formally was adopted December 6, 1865. The state of Kentucky passed the amendment in March of 1976. It's only 100 years too late. But it was again the first amendment since 1804. It was one of 3 Reconstruction amendments, including the 14th and 15th that passed in a few years right after the war. And it showed a picture here of Lincoln in 1860 to 1865, but I think we've all seen how he aged in these years. And then the final thing I want to close with is the second inaugural. And I think the second inaugural will explain why we needed a new birth of freedom, why we needed that conception of liberty. Ronald White Jr. had written a book called Lincoln's Greatest Speech. Now, it's not as famous as the Gettysburg Address, but right after Lincoln wrote to one of his friends, "I expected to wear as well as, perhaps better than, anything I have produced." I'm going to read a couple lines from it, and then I'm going to end my talk with the last sentence from the second inaugural, because it's much better than anything I can put together, and I think it's appropriate. But a couple of my favorite lines from it is, well, this is March 1865. "The progress of our arms is, I trust, reasonably satisfactory and encouraging." This was just a couple weeks before Lee surrendered. Everything was going good. Most other politicians would have been happy, or just reasonably satisfactory and encouraging seems kind of a muted reaction to me. Maybe, but I guess when you've seen several 100,000 people die, you're not going to celebrate too much. He mentioned how both parties didn't like war, but one of them would make war, one would accept. And then the sentence is, "and the war came," which might be my favorite sentence in it. It's 4 words, 13 letters, and just kind of simple. "And the war came." He also claimed that slaves constituted a peculiar and powerful interest. All knew that this interest was somehow the cause of the war. And then referring back to the meditation on the divine will, both read the same Bible and pray to the same God. Each invokes his aid against the other. It may seem strange that any man should dare to ask a just God's assistance in wringing their bread from the sweat of other men's faces, but let us judge not that we be not judged. Well, I try to read that and not judge the Confederates. It's kind of like he's leading you to the judgment and letting you do it. I think that's a very political sentence, very how it's put together. "The prayers of both could not be answered. That of neither has been answered fully. The Almighty has his own purposes." And then here, just this one sentence, just the great writing. "Finally do we hope, fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away." He goes on, "If God wills that continues 250 more years, so be it." Finally do we hope, fervently do we pray, the reversal, the repetition, the alliteration, all the English teachers probably have a field day with all that. And it's kind of, and I'm here now at the closing sentence, and it's very similar to this, except at the end of the sentence, I'm going to add one word to it, because I've read this 100 times, trying to memorize it, trying to figure out where I should pause, where I should emphasize, and I do read it differently every time. But this is the final sentence here, so I do appreciate your patience. No, not the smoothest speaker around. Appreciate your time. "With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne in battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and a lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations." Amen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go ahead with our business meeting. We'll start with gifts and donations. That's you.
I didn't bring the details. I know Mike has given us a few copies of the Newport Alumni newsletter. And we got a couple things from the AJ Jolly, a celebration of 2005, and again, I don't have the details, and one certificate from the Masons. And so I'll have the details at the next meeting.
Okay, thank you. Mike, family tree names.
We finished up the year with an FP5 256,470, and in the 2012 series 39,022 for a total of 295,492. And our goal for 3015 will be 305,000 names total. I'm going to start concentrating on filling in the blanks that we have and to merge those duplicates that we have. So the other day I gave a number and then I I merged 400 people in the database that day. So
It'll fluctuate.
yeah, it will move up and down, but hopefully it will continue to move forward. And the reason, if people say, well, how do you do it? I'll run an obituary on somebody as a good example, and it will list all his brothers and sisters, okay? And then 6 months later, one of those brothers or sisters will die, and all those people will be run again if I don't catch it. What I do now is, before I enter any names into the FB5 or 2012 on a new obituary, I run that obituary to see if any of those names appear. And if they do, instead of running a new one and putting it in, it is just at that time manually put in and merged at that time, which should cut down on some of the duplications. Which means, though, that in order to do that, I physically have to be at the Historical Society. I can't do it from home. I can't do it at home and then just plug in a flash drive or something, which is a faster way of doing it. So I'm trying to meet in the middle somewhere and control how many duplicates we have.
Very good, thank you. Marvin, cemeteries.
Well, we're not actually physically doing anything in the field, waiting for a little warmer weather. But we are still getting hints and clues coming in, and people are feeding us some information. So we've got one that we're working on now that we've been working on for about 4 years, the Weimel Cemetery out in Claryville. And I've encountered a person that's got grandparents buried there now, so we have a little bit better chance of being able to get in. So I'm kind of looking forward to that. But I also want to comment on the article that Richard did a couple of years back where he compared 2 soldiers, a Union soldier and a Confederate soldier, their lives and things like that. Well, that's kind of what we're having. We don't know there are Union soldiers and Confederate soldiers buried in our own county until we stumble on the tombstone. And then we're trying to pursue, did they die immediately after the war or were they killed in the war? Because a lot of times there's no date on that tombstone. So there's a great deal of research every time you come up with a new body, or actually the exits of the body, the tombstone. So it's an interesting process. We're not moving as fast as I would like to, but it'll get done eventually. If not by me, by someone else, I guess.
Newsletter, Jan?
Okay, I hope you all got your newsletter. If you didn't, let me know, because they went out at the end of December. Our next issue will be a special 25th anniversary celebration issue with a lot of information about the celebration we're planning for the end of June. The newsletter will come out at the end of April. So you'll have plenty of time to see everything that's going to be going on and make your plans for that day. There will be a registration form. We're going to have a special dinner for members only.
It's free.
Which will be no less, but the guest may have a charge. There will be a charge for any guests. But there will be application or registration form in there for the dinner. If anybody has articles to send in for the next time, start working on them now and get them to me as soon as you can.
Emails, correspondence.
Yes, we've had a couple things come in. Kentucky Historical Society. Every month they have a genealogy program. It's called the Second Saturday. I think they've recently changed the name. But it's the Second Saturday Genealogy Program. And each second Saturday of the month they have a different topic. This time it's about Kentucky land records. And the presenter is Candy Atkinson, who is an expert. If you are interested at all in land records and how patents and how deeds and how warrants, how it all fit together and came about, she is wonderful. She's the head of that office, the Kentucky Land Records Office. And she's very, very good. It's this Saturday, though, January 10th. I don't know if you have to register or not, but, look
You usually
online.
have to register if you're gonna eat their box lunch.
And see, they're getting
But other
away
than
from
that,
that.
you
They're
show
not doing that anymore.
Okay, well,
This, they kind of changed formats. They want to give people more time to do research after the programs. So they're starting at 10:30 to 11:30, and then 11:45 to 12:45. They'll only have a quick break in between the two sessions, and lunch option will no longer be offered.
you probably don't have to register them.
Right. But if you can't make this one, they're always good. You can check online under Kentucky Historical Society and get information about these. We always get it like right before this meeting, and it's always the second Saturday, so there's not a lot of time between the time we announce it to you all and the time that the event is. But make plans ahead of time. The other thing, kind of ties in with cemeteries. Those of you who were here when we had a lady come from the newly formed Friends of Evergreen Cemetery, that group is getting off the ground. If you have people buried in Evergreen Cemetery in Southgate or have interest in cemetery work, they're looking for volunteers, people to join their group. They're going to plan projects, lots of different types of projects for people to get involved in. Like if they're interested in different things, the actual work in the cemetery, maybe working on building a database, you know, things that are computer-based, office-based, things that are outside actually working in the cemetery. They're having a meeting Wednesday, the 29th of January. Maybe it's the 28th. She said 29th, but I think Wednesday, the last Wednesday of January is the 28th. At 6:30 to 7:30. Starts at 6:30, and they're meeting at the Fort Thomas Library. So if anybody's interested, the lady's name is Andrea Janovic. She's the acting president, and they've really got some good things hoping to accomplish at the cemetery there. Friends of Evergreen, her email is foevergreen. Not forevergreen, faux evergreen, FOEVERGREN, 1847@gmail. But I'll leave this up here if you're interested.
And to preface this, you know, I don't know how many realize it, but most of the public cemeteries in our area are all in trouble. For the main reason is that people are being cremated, which is then there's no perpetual care whatsoever going into the cemetery. Evergreen's our largest cemetery, one of our oldest cemeteries. A lot of bodies were moved out there from the Newport burial ground, which there's no money whatsoever to take care of their graves. And in general, Evergreen is in pretty bad shape. They're having prisoners come out of the jails to mow the grass. There's trees that should have been cut down years ago. They don't have any money to take care of it. They're doing the best they can. So this Friends of Evergreen is the best thing I've heard of in the last 5 or 6 years to help this cemetery. I mean, I live in Grand Slick, the cemetery next to me. They're landlocked. Nobody will sell them any land, and they have signs up asking for donations too. I mean, almost every public cemetery is that way. If it's a church cemetery, at least you got somebody who has still contributing. But if it's a public cemetery, it's getting harder and harder to keep these up. So if you hear, that's why it's so important for Evergreen to be involved and have a group like this going for them.
Who owns Evergreen?
It's
a
I think
board.
Please?
It's a board.
Yeah, it's a board. This is probably a public nonprofit, I would imagine. I don't think it's a corporation. I mean, it's probably a corporation, but not a profit corporation.
I asked that same question, how's the board elected, appointed, or what? Anybody can tell me. No, I'm serious.
Yeah,
If anybody knows, I'd be glad to, you know.
and that could be part of the problem. I mean, that's the trouble for a lot of
So
organizations.
it's not a Southgate responsibility, it's
Yeah,
not a
yeah.
Hamilton County responsibility, it's not a
It's
Kentucky
a
responsibility,
total entity of itself.
And
but the
Andrea
airport board.
Janovic is on the board. That's why she does not want to remain the president of this new Friends group, because that could kind of be a conflict of interest, or, you know, she's probably got her hands full with one thing, but eventually she hopes to turn it over to someone else.
Didn't she run for some office this round?
I don't
The name
know.
sounds awful familiar.
I think she's a lawyer.
Yeah.
She
I
did
think
run
she
for
ran-
something, I don't know.
She ran for something. No, I don't think-
She ran for
She didn't win.
county clerk.
County clerk?
Yeah, she didn't win, I know that.
Okay, moving on. Veterans records, we now have 13,121 in our room up there. We don't have a report on picture albums. History Day meeting, the next one for the planning of it is February 7th. The History Day itself is March 28th at NKU. Last month, we gave the Gray family a plaque for their donation to the historical study of 500,000 negatives. I know personally, I loaded them all in my truck. And it was quite a catch for us. I mean, that's probably the biggest donation we've ever gotten, about bar none. Dr. Bob Lorenz is starting an idea of helping St. Stephen do the same thing that Evergreen Cemetery is doing. He wants to go up and help them with the records. That's the biggest problem with most of these cemeteries is the records are in disarray because there's nobody being paid to do anything with them. They're just kind of stacked in file cabinets and, so he's going to work on that. We did get a new computer, right, Jan?
Yes, we did.
Okay. The society.
Our old one went foot. Our drive went bad, and we've got a replacement.
Did we get everything off the hard drive? Was able to do that?
We had to jerry-rig it a little bit. We're working on it still. That's why I talked to you. Now's the time we need to go forward at one time with everything.
But we were also backing up,
Yeah.
Okay.
so things that were backed up are
It looks like the two main files for the genealogy side of the house were there. There's some others which really are duplicates. And I was able to get on the internet and everything, so today,
Okay.
so things seem to be okay.
Okay, very good. We did have a board member visit, Elizabeth Clem. You remember her, she used to come all the time. She has dementia, which is pretty bad, so she really doesn't know most of us anymore, but she seems happy and she's at her home and her caretakers take very good care of her, and as long as she can, she'll stay in her own house. So that's a good thing for her. Future meetings. Well, we preface to say it's supposed to be at Wilder next month here, but I'm going to call them tomorrow to make sure that they haven't bumped me out for the next 3 or 4 months. Anyway, next month is here. Marvin Sullivan of Pendleton County. He was an auctioneer. He's a historian. He's a bunch of things. Very funny guy to listen to. He tells lots of historical talks. March is here, also here. Jim Benton's going to come and talk about Mary Engel's escape from the Native Americans at Big Bone and Big Bone itself. The 28th of March is History Day. April the 9th, Keith Daniel's going to come and talk about Camp Sunshine. A lot of you remember that from when you were a child. Some people even went there as a child. May 14th, we're going to have a talk and tour at the First 12 Mile Baptist Church. Been past it many times, never been in it, so it's time to go visit that church. It's one of our oldest congregations. June 11th, we're not going to have a meeting because we're going to have moved it 3 weeks later, or 2 weeks later, to the 27th, and that's our big celebration at the Alexander Fairgrounds for the 25th anniversary of the society. So we got all kinds of stuff planned, and we need lots of volunteers. So if anybody can help us out that day, please let us know. I don't have anything for July the 9th, but I have contacted James Morgan. He's connected with the name of the church.
Aspen Grove?
Aspen Grove, that little church off Old Route 9 up there. It's been there for almost 100 years. And it's a very, very small congregation, but the buildings are all pretty well intact, even though they've been there a long time. So if I can get us in there, we're going to go there. But that's a place that's been there a long time, and we've never been to it. 18th of July is the Backroads Farm Tour. On August 13th, we're all going to the Taylor Mansion in Newport. And Russ Thomas is going to give us a talk on General James Taylor. He's an absolute expert on the topic. Anytime we talk to him, he's so full of information. He's got a smile from ear to ear, and he just can't stop talking. He just loves the topic. He works for the lawyers down there, but he's the resident historian for him. So it'll be very good. September 10th, we have Tom Seither. He's a retired principal from Bishop Rossard. And he's been researching over the years. He had 6 ancestors that fought the Civil War. Six ancestors that were brothers. 3 fought for the North, 3 fought for the South. So he's going to do the whole story is why this group one way and that, and all the conflicts in the family. Should be a very good talk. I don't have anything for October yet. November 12th, Don Tolzman is going to come from the Hamilton County Genealogical Society and talk to us about researching our German ancestors. And December 10th, hopefully we'll be here. And that we're going to have our Christmas meeting, and I'm going to try to get the Hills of Kentucky Dulcimers to come back in. I contacted them. I haven't got a word from them yet.
Is the September meeting here?
I don't have a spot for it yet. It's probably going to be here. When I call them tomorrow, I'm going to have them nailed on the wall someplace so I don't get kicked out of it. All right, anybody else have anything? Well, thank you very much for coming on this terrible cold night. Hopefully everybody will have a warm heart, if nothing else.
Oh, Jerry Moore.
Oh, yeah, Jerry Moore. Jerry Moore worked in our office for 17 years. He retired. He does the Christmas concert in Alexandria every year. He and 2 other men, it's called the Crooners Christmas. He collapsed in the middle of it, ended up in the hospital that same night. And the word we've got is that they couldn't find anything wrong with him, so they sent him home. So he's supposed to be out and about, so we wish him well. We hope he will continue being healthy. All right, thank you very much.